Hello, everybody. It's an honor to be able to come back regularly every year and participate with a group of people who are using technology to make the world a better place. Our world today is facing many challenges, and it is our goal to find a way of addressing those creatively and in a way that allows us to create new opportunities as we solve problems. Now, today, I'm going to draw live as I speak. So what that means is, on screen, we're going to see an image of me and an image of what I'm going to draw live as I speak. One of the things that's very important about where we are today is the word crisis. Crisis, in its Latin and Greek meaning, translates into a decision point. So when we're in a crisis, it means we're in a decision point. And what I want to share with you today is what that means when the world is in a decision point. So the first thing that I want to explore is this idea that we need to think provocatively, we need to think creatively, and we need to think passionately. Now, as an Irishman, I do need to give you a warning that I am passionate indeed, and I will be provocative. Now, I'm passionate because I believe change is happening, and you are the leaders of that change. And I will be provocative because I believe there are assumptions that we use that need to be challenged. When we challenge those assumptions, we're going to enter into new possibilities and open up new ways of thinking. So the first thing that I want to explore is, in today's world, we are now at a decision point, a crisis, a turning point. And what I want to explore with you is, how do we individually and collectively change the world? Now, changing the world for me is actually an easy three-step process. The first step is that we need to change the way that we think. When you change the way that you think, automatically you change the way that you act. When you change the way that you act, you automatically change the world. Changing the world starts by changing the way we're thinking. Changing the way we're thinking influences our actions, and from our actions, changing the world. Gandhi has said, be the change you want to see in the world, which is a lovely way of bringing this back to the essence, which is, you are the change. Now, one of the things that I really want to emphasize today is just this aspect of, how do we change our mind? How do we create a new mind, individually and collectively? So I want to offer you some of the insights that I work with. Now, these two words are probably two of my favorite words. We have the word economy, that has the word eco in it, and we have ecology, which also has the word eco in it. Now, what's fantastic about this is that when you understand that the word eco means home, we'll get an insight into what economy and ecology means. Economy means home management. Ecology means home knowledge. So the knowledge to manage our home. All of the work I do takes place within this circle. And I believe that one of the things that has come out of the COVID situation around the world, people being locked down, is a profound sense of reflection and an opening question: how do we start again? Now, the first thing that I'd like to reflect on is we should not be doing business as usual. Instead, it should be business as unusual. In a sense, what we want to do is we want to find the balance between economy and ecology. So, look at this. This now is a famous puzzle. Now, for those of you who know how to solve this puzzle, you will probably remember. For those of you who don't know how to solve this puzzle, when I tell you now, you'll never forget. So, spoiler alert. The challenge in this puzzle is there are 9 dots placed out in this way, and your task is to join those dots using only 4 straight lines. So, if I was to do this, for example, that's 1 line, that's 2 line, that's 3 line, that's 4 lines, I still have a problem because I haven't solved it. Now, in the interest of time and to already give you the answer, what I want to show you is how you solve this. You can't solve this by thinking in that way. The way to solve this with 4 straight lines joining all of the dots is the following. You do this. Now, what we've done here is we've solved it by using 4 straight lines to join all of the dots. However, the most important thing is that we have extended to 2 other dots that were not in the original puzzle. Now, this is the classic example of literally thinking outside of the box. You have to think out of the box to be able to form the connections to solve it. I believe this is the perfect metaphor as to where we are in the world today. We need to think out of the limited system that we have in place, expand it to create new opportunities so that we can solve in a new way. This is the best of time and the worst of time. That's the opening line of a great book. The best of times and the worst of times. The worst of times because change comes sometimes difficult for many people. The best of times because we need to change and create new possibilities. So, innovation. What is innovation? Innovation, very simply, is the generation of alternatives. When you think of the word innovation, sometimes we might get lost in that it's a complex process. It requires many different people. It might require a lot of time and effort. Very simply, innovation is generating alternatives. And there are 2 forms of alternatives. Let's imagine that this is a spectrum of alternatives. On one side is what you would call doing something that you take something and you improve it. And then the other side is you take something and you don't take something, you create something new. So improvement or creating something new. Now, improvement is the example of where businesses want to improve by, let's say, 10%. Whereas over here, creating something new is the 10x scenario. You multiply by a factor of 10. Both of these are valid. A spectrum of alternatives is where we need to be spending our time. And in fact, if we look at the job description for all of us in the future, it is to generate alternatives. If there is one thing that we all share in common, it is to generate alternatives. Now, just to give you a very practical way of looking at this, the way to improve something is to ask, how do we do this better? So you have something, you take it, and you say, how do we do it better? That is improvement. Whereas in this space of creating something new, you ask, how do we do this differently? These are different ways of thinking. One is where you take something, you improve it. The other one is you start and you create whatever is new. So this mindset of generating alternatives is one of the key things that I want to offer you. So far, what we're saying is we're at a turning point in the world. It's a crisis. It's a decision point. We want to make sure that we can change the world by changing the way that we think, which changes our action, which changes the world. And there are two frames that I'm offering you right now. The first frame is to think about economy and ecology being related. And the second thing is that to break out of the box, to be innovative, we generate alternatives. So as we go a little bit further, I want to invite you to ask questions. Now, I believe that you can type these, and somewhere during this conversation, I will reflect on what those questions could be. So please indeed ask questions, comments, and give opinions if you wish. So very simply, the reality is the following. All things change when we do. All things change when we do. If we want to be the change in the world, we have to change. It comes from within. And if you could imagine, it's almost like dropping a stone of a new idea, and that new idea causes ripples of action to flow outwards to create a new world. Changing the world starts with ourselves. That is why I'm repeatedly honored and excited to work with this community, because young people have the ability to say very easily, I'm going to change. They change their way of thinking, they have fresh ideas, they change their actions, they change the world. So, how do we do so? What is the best way of asking ourselves, how do we change the world? Well, the best way to change the world, as I say, is you start with your own mind. Now, we want to expand also into how do we change other people's minds, but we don't change them, they change them. It's all about a choice. What I want to offer you here is a model that I use in communication and a model that I use regularly with organizations and people that I work with on teams. It's what I call an ABC model of perception. Now, what it's about is the following. We all have assumptions. In fact, our assumptions are the foundation in which our beliefs are then built. So whatever beliefs you have are built on a set of assumptions. And those beliefs then have concepts built on top of them. So, for example, a limiting assumption, I would say, is, let's say, that human beings are self-interested animals. That could be an assumption. I would say that's a limited assumption. So human beings are self-interested animals. That might create a belief that we need to compete. And that might create a concept that says there are limited resources in the world. Now, if we want to change the way that we think, it is difficult to start on the concept level. We need to step down to the assumptions. So if you're having a conversation with somebody about something that is important to you, if you argue on the level of concept, it's not going to work. They will use their intelligence to reinforce that. So if we want to change ourselves and change the world, we start by changing our assumptions. For example, human beings are spiritual creatures. That might lead to a belief that we are altruistic, we think about others, and that might lead into the possibility that the world is ready for new value. So we could work up from a new assumption. How do we change the world? We change our mind, which changes our action, which changes the world. Think about economy and ecology being balanced, and think about generating alternatives. So let's go further. One of the challenges, however, that we're going to face is a challenge of perception. Now, I want to offer you 3 challenges. The first challenge is how we see the world, our perception. And there was a study done that said 90% of our mistakes come from mistakes in our perception, how we see the world. And only 10% of mistakes come from our thinking. So in other words, how we see the world, our frame, if we get that right, we're mostly going to get our thinking right. If we get it wrong, however, we're going to get the whole thing wrong. So perception, one of the challenges that we have is a challenge of perception. So let's explore what this means. Our first task, our first job for ourselves is to see things as they are, not as we are. So what I mean by that is that all of us have a bubble of perception around us. And if there is something outside in the world, let's say it's represented by this shape, well, when it goes internal into our perception, all too often it changes. And it changes because of our perception, not because of the reality. Our perception becomes our reality. So what we're facing here is, how do we make sure that we keep our perception wide? How do we check our perception and open it up? Well, here is an example of the challenges of that. Look at this. Now, this is a story about an Irish man. So, and because I'm Irish, of course, I'm allowed to tell this story. So there was an Irish man called Patrick Murphy who on Monday night, he went to the local pub and he had 10 whiskeys and he had a cola. Now, the next morning he woke up and he had a terrible hangover. So on Tuesday morning, he had 10 vodkas plus a cola. Now, the next morning, Wednesday morning, he wakes up, he has a terrible hangover. So on Wednesday, he has 10 Bacardis and a cola. Now, on Thursday morning, he wakes up, a terrible hangover, and he says, "That's it. No more cola for me." Of course, this is a logical way of looking at the facts. It was obviously cola was the common denominator here. Of course, it's the alcohol that's hidden within these. This is an example of where we are locked in with a certain level of perception that limits us. Now, we can open up the example again of where this was the idea of having the 9 dots within this. It is a limited perception. To be able to break out of those dots, we need to break free from the system. And this area outside here is a new level of thinking. It's where we break our perception and open up. In fact, this story of cola being the problem rather than the alcohol is what you can call first order thinking. First order thinking is where you're locked within the system and you don't change the system. Second order thinking is where you step out and you create a new level of perception. So, perception is a challenge. It's one of the things we need to manage. And the best way to manage perception is by working with others. Look at this. this sequence of numbers is a logical sequence of numbers. It's 12, 13, 14. It's a logical sequence of numbers. Now, when I do this, however, suddenly the sequence of numbers begin to change into a sequence of letters. So we have A, B, C, and we have 12, 13, 14. Now, which one of these perceptions is correct? Well, we're not interested in arguing which one of these is correct. What we're interested in doing is collaborating to form a wider perception. So, the world is at a decision point. How do we change the world? We start by changing our mind, we change our actions, we change the world. Think about how economy and ecology is connected and generate alternatives. The way to generate alternatives is by start challenging our assumptions, then our beliefs, then our concepts, ABC. And from there, the best thing to do by widening our perception is to work with others, collaborate. By collaborating, you're forcing your perception to be wider. So that's the first challenge. Let's go further. Our second challenge is a challenge of what I call presence. Presence, being present, being here now. And here's a statement that I want to share with you. What we are seeking is a state, not a place. What I mean by that is all too often we are looking outside for the thing we want. We want to be something outside. We're seeking something outside of ourselves. Instead, what we're really looking for is something inside ourselves, a state. This is about being present, and this is about many conversations these days about the dangers of social media as a way of distracting ourselves as opposed to helping us be more and be ourselves. So what I want to offer here is a growing theme around the world of mindfulness, about being present. And this idea of seeking a state is something that I believe is incredibly important, particularly when we can't travel. So one of the things that has come up is this concept of we are here however, all too often we make our here there. In other words, even though we are here, we're seeking something else. We are being outside of ourselves and outside of our community. The balance, of course, is to find how do we be present in everything we do. And this, I want to park here because there's a large conversation we could have around this, and perhaps you could have some questions on this. What I want to offer you is I believe technology in the future will work with the dynamic that is growing around mindfulness and helping people to be present as opposed to being distracted. So let's explore the third challenge. The third challenge is around purpose. So we've dealt with a challenge of where we need to check our perception. Then we're looking at a challenge of how do we be present. The third challenge is, do we have a purpose? Now, one of the things that I want to share with you is this model that I use regularly with organizations to help them map out their innovation matrix. And there are two things from this. You can see that from the head of the person comes ideas. Ideas flow outwards from our head, whereas ideals flow from the heart, ethics, values. And when we look at innovation, I believe that the world has a lot of ideas. They're very good with their ideas. However, we're definitely limited when it comes to our ideals. Now, there's a growing movement in the world where ideals and ideas are being mixed together to create something truly unique. And I believe that this is the direction that technology is moving. And this community of using technology, digital technology, to address social change, for me, is this direction. So we want to find how our technology solves social issues in a way that the ideas are excellent and the ideals are excellent. This is a model that I use, as I say, with organizations to map out their ideas, their ideals, and how their innovation matrix is going to develop over time. Now, one of the things that I think is important for us to explore is when we think of who we are and where we are, we often can think about this idea of having a desire. A desire is where we are following a vision, because the word desire means desire, which means of the stars. When we have a desire, we are elevating ourselves to a higher vision that follows a star. And one of the roles that I believe that digital transformation is going to have in society now and in the future is going to be elevating people's desire to a higher level, a desire that goes beyond own selfish needs and into global support, global change. What is your desire? What is the star that you're following? So let's anchor ourselves right now and look at a quote from Marcus Aurelius. And the quote that Marcus Aurelius is offering us here, Marcus Aurelius, of course, was a Roman emperor, and he was famous for his philosophy and stoicism. And what he said was, act from a principle or towards an aim. Act from a principle or towards an aim. Now, what I love about this is that he begins by speaking about act, then he moves into the idea of a principle. It's foundational. You act from that, and you move towards an aim, a goal, a vision, a desire. And for me, everything about the startup culture, digital transformation and innovation is within this, because we could extract that to mean the following. Here is what I believe every organization, startup, and initiative really does. They act towards a purpose through a process from principles. Another way of looking at this is we've got a set of principles in our foundation. We go through a process, and that leads us to a purpose. So, if you want to change the world, we start by changing the way that we think. How we think changes the way we act, and how we act then changes the world. A three-step process. Similarly, I believe that organizations follow a three-step process. They have a set of foundational principles that they use as everything grows from it. It's a foundation. Then they go through a process, and the process is definitely a learning by doing process. it's iteration. You move through it by cycles of learning. And the third thing that every organization has is this idea that they're working towards a purpose. Purpose-driven digital innovation. This is what drives organizations. This is what I believe drives them now and in the future. So the thing that we want to explore is how your actions have a set of principles. At the heart of what you do is a set of principles. And that set of principles is aligned to your purpose. These two things are aligned. You have a set of principles and you have a purpose that you're working towards. And repeatedly, you take action in cycles of learning to move forward. This, for me, is how organizations set themselves up to create a culture of growth. Every organization, every community that I've ever worked with that has a sustained culture of growth and a sustained culture of innovation has this model in place. A set of principles, a purpose that it's aligned to, and a set of actions. So the key thing that we're doing here is we are aligning and we are acting. Alignment and action. Alignment and action. Based on what has happened with the world today and where we've all been locked down, we have been asked to reflect. And I believe that reflection asks us to call into place what is aligned. And from that alignment, how then do we act? Now, this brings me to the end of the roll, and now I'm going to re-roll, recap before perhaps we have some comments. Now, I also see that my role may not be on the screen, so I wonder if that is all still happening and you can see this. Let me continue. Nora, if you can let me know that indeed the screen is working. Either way, I'm going to give you a recap now and re-roll. So what we're speaking about here today is, oh, thank you, we've got it back on the screen. Is that right, Nora? Yes. Okay, wonderful. Digital technology. Here we go. So let's re-roll and recap. In re-rolling and recapping, we're at a decision point in the world. That decision point is a crisis. A crisis is a decision point. What decision are you going to make? A culture of innovation is driven when you have a set of principles aligned to a purpose. They're aligned, they're on top of each other, they are driven by each other. One is a push, the other is a pull. And there's a set of actions that we take around that. Now, that can be summarized in what I call, we act towards a purpose through a process from principles. Now, let's just be a little bit more specific and give examples of principles. One of the principles could be around something like creating a sense of trust and transparency, and that's to do with values, which are very important. Other principles are operational principles. And one of my favorite operational principles is one that Peter regularly reminds us of with this association, and that is start here, start now, start with what you have. It's very practical. There are no excuses. We are agile. We use whatever resources we have around us. So one of the principles could be an operational principle, start here, start now, start with what we have. The other set of principles could be around the values that we want, the ethics that we have, and so on. And remember, principles are the DNA of organizations. Amazon has ingrained into its DNA what it's called as the founder's mentality, a set of principles where they will say every day is day one. You have other organizations, for example, the idea that a process is a process of learning by doing. It's a process of iteration. What that really means is there is no plan B. Amazon's teams will say, there's no plan B, there is only iteration. And then a purpose, every organization that has a culture of innovation and this idea of a dynamic of growth has a purpose. And a purpose has to be big enough for who we are going to be. Not who we are, who we're going to be. So let's go a little bit further and explore how Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor, would say, act from a principle or towards an aim. Act. Start here, start now, start with what you have. Now, desire means of the stars, desire, of the stars. What is the star you are following? The organization called Verizon in America, it's a telecom company. They have a culture where they base it on what they call being and belonging. Being is where you focus on the best self you can be. Belonging is where together, collectively, we work towards a purpose. Being, belonging. So organizations like Verizon, for example, have this ingrained into their culture. Ideas and ideals. This is a balance that we need to find in order to overcome this challenge of purpose. Now, one of the things that I would like to share are examples such as, of course, one of the most famous one these days is Elon Musk, who pretty much bases everything he does by creating a dynamic of hope. His whole phenomenon is hope. Hope as a currency of communication. We can create a new way of living with cars. We can expand the boundaries of our planet, etc. He creates hope. So what he does is he tries to build in ideals with his ideas. This is an incredibly powerful way of doing this. Another practical example is an organization here in Holland that's called the Efteling. Here in the Netherlands, the Efteling is the equivalent of Disneyland. It's older than Disneyland, and it's an amusement park. The Efteling, however, has a clear purpose, a star that it's following, which is based on 7 generational thinking. The idea is that in every lifetime, you could potentially touch 7 generations. You're in the middle, your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, then your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren. So this idea of 7 generations is how an organization here in Holland plans its activities. Its ideals are across 7 generations, and its ideas are world-class. Great example of how we need to balance these two to overcome the challenge of purpose. Next, we have this idea of being present. How do we make sure we are here, not here and thinking just of there? One of my favorite insights from CEOs that I meet is they have a habit, and every morning their habit starts with the following. They do not ask a how question, they ask a why question. A how question is, how do we get more customers? That's a how question. It's there, it's out there. A why question is, why would customers want to buy? That's a very different question which grounds us here. So what we're looking at really is this idea that what we're seeking is a state, not a place. This idea about being present. I believe technology is going to elevate and help us make sure that this sense of being present is going to be one of the currencies the digital transformation is going to embody. Be present. Now, this is a reminder here as to why we need to collaborate. The European Union is definitely got in its foundation a set of principles that encourages collaboration. Collaboration is essential for broadening our perspective. Collaboration means that we will overcome the challenges of a limiting perception that would lock us within the box. A first level thinking, we're elevated into second level thinking. It's about seeing things as they are, not as we are. We elevate our perception bubble to include other perceptions. So the challenge of perception is overcome when we collaborate with others. And there's something that is absolutely essential about the European Union and about others who are working towards a sense of unification, and that is, when we speak about unity, unity does not mean the same. Unity does not mean the sameness. Unity should be encouraged to understood as unity in diversity. Unity in diversity. The diversity of who we are as a human species is our richness. We need to embrace that richness as we move forward in a global unity. So, if we want to change the way that we think, thinking about concepts is built on beliefs, which is really based on foundational assumptions. We need to challenge our assumptions first before we could really change the way that we would believe and form concepts. All things change when we do. All things change. Therefore, our challenge is to make sure that we and others are expanding our alternatives. Innovation simply means generating alternatives, whether it's 10% improvement or 10x with something new. All of these, this spectrum of alternatives is essential. All alternatives are valid on this spectrum. If I'm in an organization that is a successful organization, I may not want something new. I may want to continue what we're doing and improve it. Alternatively, I can break free of that and create something new. Here I'm going to take a moment and give you a reflection on growth. Growth is now one of the dynamics that is driving the world. And when we speak about growth, we need to realize that growth does not necessarily mean bigger, more. Growth also means better. The example that I use is a tree. A tree grows in size to a certain height. What that height is depends on the tree, depends on the environment, depends on the nutrients. When the tree reaches its right level of height, it then changes from a vertical growth into a circular growth that could be called development. A tree continues to grow in its development by bearing fruit. Is the purpose of the tree to grow in height or to bear fruit? So when we speak about growth, I want us to realize that it is about not just growing bigger, it's also about growing in a circular way that is about development. How do we generate ideas? We think outside of the box, which basically is creating new points of connection. Our economy is intimately connected to our ecology, and these two words mean home management and home knowledge. 3 steps to change the world. You start by changing the way that you think. That changes our action, which then changes the world. If you want to change the world, start by changing the way that you think. Which brings us back to our starting point and reminder of the world is in a crisis. A crisis really translates into a decision point. Nora, do we have questions, comments, and emotions before I end?
Yes, we have a few comments.
Thank you for your patience and your attention.
We have a few comments that the audience is basically very impressed. But there's one question. Do you believe in endless economic growth? Or
wonderful.
Should companies set the main focus on other values?
Absolutely. Well, you can hear that I've almost answered that in my footnote on growth. No, the dynamic that we have in the world, that growth means always bigger, always more, is a cancer. And literally because the only thing in nature that continues to grow, independent of everything else around it, is cancer. So it is unhealthy to work with a concept that organizations have to grow endlessly. Instead, use the metaphor of a tree. How big should your organization grow? Well, it depends on the species of the tree, metaphorically. It depends on the nutrients that you have around it. All trees, however, reach a certain limit. When they reach that vertical limit, they change from a vertical growth into a circular growth. And that circular growth is about bearing fruit. So growth is incredibly important in this world. We need new trees, metaphorically and literally, to grow. And we need them to bear fruit. I believe in the future, we will come to a more mature understanding of what growth means. Growth does not always mean bigger, bigger, bigger. Growth means bigger to a certain extent, and then a circular growth of bearing fruit. Wonderful question. It's the heart of what I do, and it's the heart of why I use economy and ecology. When you put that question into the center of that circle between economy and economy, it answers it for you. Nora, another question or comment, please.
No.
Wonderful. So
I think everything was crystal clear.
Wonderful. Then there's a conclusion. Few final thoughts and an invitation. The conclusion and summary of what I've said today on this roll of paper is all about change is happening and you are the leaders of that change. We have tools at our fingertips, tools that are digital technology that can be used for social innovation, social change. And I believe that all of this is about understanding right now that the world is in crisis. And a crisis translates into a decision point. And I'm inviting you to decide today that we will use digital transformation, digital technologies, to make a social transformation in the world that begins with ourselves and opens out. I believe that this is the best of times. Thank you very much.